Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
At this time, thank you. At this time, I ask board members to please put your device on mute and remain muted unless you are speaking. This will help to reduce digital interference and will help our board clerk and the listening audience keep track of who is speaking. Members, if you wish to speak, please put your hand or use the raise hand feature on this platform. If I am unclear on the speaking order, I will ask the secretary to read the speaking queue based on the order indicated by the virtual platform that we are using. With that, as stated in the public notice of this meeting, in order to comply with the Safer at Home order issued by the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, I move that we waive paragraphs 3A, 5D, and any other portions of Board Rule 1.06, which may restrict or prevent the board from convening a remote or virtual meeting under the present emergency circumstances, in order to allow members of the board to participate remotely without a quorum of the board being physically present at the Central Services Building. May I have a motion for this, please?
So move.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Will the secretary please call the roll?
On Director Miller's motion to waive all applicable sections of Board Rule 1.06 in order for the committee to meet remotely or virtually without a quorum of the board being physically present here in the central office building. Director Baez.
Aye.
Director Miller.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
Director Woodward.
Aye.
Chair Taylor.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes. The motion passes. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Before we move on, I would like to state for the record that due to the contingencies of the COVID-19 pandemic and in recognition of Governor Evers' Safer at Home order, we have been holding our meetings virtually. Board members are participating remotely. We have limited the number of administrators staffing this meeting, and we are not allowing members of the public to be physically present in the Central Services Building. However, in order to allow as much public participation as possible, in addition to our normal practice of broadcasting our meetings on radio station WYMS 88.9 FM and live streaming them on the MPS website, we are broadcasting this meeting on the MPS YouTube screen, the link to which may be found on the MPS website on the broadcast page. I want to thank the public for its understanding and for its willingness to continue to participate in the governance of its schools under these trying circumstances. Madam Chair, I ask you to lead us in the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance.
Madam Chair.
Sorry, yes.
For our listening audience, Director Peterson, in addition to committee members, are on the call.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I will now ask the Secretary to lead us in the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance. I remind members to please keep your devices muted to avoid interference. Madam Secretary, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will now proceed with the items on tonight's agenda. For our listening audience, if you wish to access this evening's agenda items and attachments online, you may do so by visiting esb.milwaukee.k12.wi.us. Madam Secretary, what is the first item of business?
Item 1 is a report with possible action on bullying prevention. This is an informational item, and although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Thank you. Does the administration wish to make comments?
Superintendent of Schools. Our first item this evening is a follow-up report aligned to the board September 2019 action regarding bullying prevention. At this time, I'll ask Kim Morath to provide us an update. Kim?
Thank you, Dr. Posley.
Chair Taylor, members of the committee, I'm Kimberly Morath, Social and Emotional Learning Supervisor. Since we were last here in December, a work group of Violence Prevention Program staff has been working on the final deliverables of that resolution, which was a review of Administrative Policy 8.52 on bullying and the development of administrative procedures to support that bullying policy. The development and review process of these drafts included staff from multiple departments. Those drafts have been submitted to the administration for the review process before they come before the board. In addition to the development of the procedures and review of the policy, staff from the Violence Prevention Program consulted with an expert in the field, and we reviewed recommended documents, including research publications and bullying prevention and intervention plans. Based on this, we've revised our bullying prevention trainings to reflect the latest research and best practices, including both recommended and not recommended practices, the inclusion of interim safety measures for victims, for reporters, and for witnesses of bullying, and the inclusion of both support and discipline strategies. Upcoming PD will be further revised to reflect the updated policy and procedures when those documents have been approved. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for that. Do committee members wish to make comments or ask questions? Madam Secretary, I don't see any hands raised or in the queue. Is there anybody waiting to speak?
We do have Director O'Halloran in the queue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Taylor, and thank you, administration, for the update. When we had previously discussed this prior to the meeting, there was a question about cyberbullying, and I think that is something that, given the way so much of our interaction with our students and has gone online, can you speak to the inclusion of that in the work that you're doing, please?
Yes, Chair Taylor, Director O'Halloran. So cyberbullying is included in the bullying policy. It's both defined in the definition section as one of the types of bullying that's prohibited. And then there's also a clause in our policy that speaks to any out of school speech or behavior is subject to the policy as well if it has a substantial disruption, causes a substantial disruption to the learning environment. So cyberbullying as a type of bullying requires investigation and involvement of parents the same way that bullying in the school setting does. So the players in the bullying situation tend to be similar both between the cyberbullying environment and the physical school environment. So by including both the definition and the prohibition within the policy, it is covering both of those things. And I think that's the way that that's bridged into that policy.
Director O'Halloran, any follow-up or additional questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Any other committee members wish to speak? Any comments or questions on this item? I see none, Madam Secretary. Do you have any in the queue if I missed them?
Madam Chair, we have no speakers in the queue and we have no public testimony on this item.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. What is the pleasure of the committee with respects to this item?
Madam Chair, this
Yes.
is an informational item, and although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Next item, please.
The next item is item 2, a report with possible action on the draft of the MPS Equity Guidebook. This is an informational item, and although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Administration, do you have any comments on this item?
Chair Taylor and members of the committee, Keith Posley, Superintendent of Schools. Before asking Dr. Patricia Ellis to provide an overview of the draft equity guidebook that is included in your item, I would like to share that the work The revised equity guidebook has taken into consideration previous feedback, various thought partners, as well as a review of guidance from other guidebooks from other districts. Equity remains the forefront of our efforts as a district and informs our work on behalf of our students. The draft guidebook is designed to be flexible and responsive to all members of the MPS family in terms of current and future equity, access, and inclusion needs. I am pleased that the team has put in thoughtful work to develop a framework that will assist schools and the district to implement practices that will ensure that every child has equal chance for success. At this time, I will ask Dr. Ellis to provide an overview of the key elements of the draft equity guidebook before you. Dr. Ellis.
Good evening, Chair Taylor and members of the PACE Committee. My name is Patricia Ellis, and I serve as the Interim Director of Equity, Access, and Inclusion. As stated, the item before you this evening outlines the revised equity guidebook draft, which supports the administrative policies and procedure regarding equity. The Milwaukee Board of School Directors adopted Administrative Policy 1.06, Equity in MPS, and Administrative Procedure 1.06, Effort to Achieve Equity, to acknowledge and address inequities that exist within the Milwaukee Public Schools. There is also the expectation that an equity guidebook be established to outline actions implemented by the district to, as stated in administration, provide every student with equitable access to high quality and culturally relevant instruction, curriculum, support, facilities, technology, and educational resources that respect their individual identities, backgrounds, abilities, and experiences. In October 2018, an equity work group was convened to develop the equity guidebook. In August 2019, a draft of the equity guidebook was presented to the board for review and feedback. The board directed the administration to make revisions and return to the board to present a revised equity guidebook in April 2020. Due to the unexpected school closure in March, the date for the board was adjusted to May. During this time, there were staffing changes, and Dr. Posley made the commitment to expand the area by developing an equity department to support critical and urgent work of equity, access, and inclusion. Since then, an equity and inclusion specialist has been appointed, as well as an interim director to advance district-wide equity, access, and inclusion efforts. To ensure alignment at the district level, this revised guidebook draft explicitly reflects and embeds the following. Firstly, Administrative Policy 1.01, which states in part that the Milwaukee Public Schools will be among the highest student growth school systems in the country. All district staff will be committed to providing an equitable educational environment that is child-centered, supports achievement, and respects and embraces diversity. Furthermore, a core belief of this policy Secondly, Administrative Policy 1.06, Equity in MPS, which defines equity as an allocation of district resources, supports, and opportunity that is based on the needs a background, definitions, guiding principles, goals, and monitoring and evaluation statements. Thirdly, Administrative Procedure 1.06, efforts to achieve equity, includes implementation language as follows: to ensure all equitable allocation of district resources and to achieve the district's equity goals. In the development of the revised MPS Equity Guidebook draft, we also took into consideration and aligned the district's 5 priorities for success: increase academic achievement and accountability, improve district and school culture, develop our staff, ensure fiscal responsibility and transparency, and strengthen communication and collaboration to the document. The revised MPS Equity Guidebook draft was also developed with insights from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction's Equity Framework. We also looked at a variety of other equity models and sought out a group of individuals that would reflect the voice of students, parents, guardians, community partners, district staff, and other stakeholders. Due to the nature and purpose of this document, the voice of stakeholders will be continuously sought to ensure we are actively engaged in due diligence towards achieving equity, access, and inclusion for all. Because we know and realize that, in the words of Harvey Mackay, if you wish others to believe in you, you must first convince them that you believe in them. Work of the Equity Work Group has been honored in the revised draft, as well as feedback from the August board cycle. Similarities, revisions, and modifications to the current draft document include: in the August 2019 document, 4 goal areas were identified: equity in academics, equity in finance and operations, stakeholder equity, and equity in workforce development. In the revised MPS Equity Guidebook draft, there are 5 goal areas: equity in academics, equity in cultural awareness and responsiveness, equity in human resources, equity in finance, and equity for students, families, educators, and community stakeholders. In the revised MPS Equity Guidebook draft, the practices identified in Administrative Procedure 1.06 are aligned to 4 specific focus areas for each of the 5 equity goals. This revision was made to ensure that the guidebook offered intentional, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely areas of focus that will provide enough flexibility for entry, continuous improvement, and transformational practices to become a part of the district-wide fabric and expectation in a visible, viable, and vibrant manner. Additional goal areas could and would be added based on continuous evidence from multiple data sources as we strive with integrity toward institutionalizing high-quality equity practices district-wide. The current and revised draft guidebook also includes an overview of the current and desired state. In addition to in the revised draft guidebook, the revised MPS Equity Guidebook will include a timeline of 2020, 2021 through 2023, 2024, and a matrix that includes annually providing evidence of district-wide progress toward the goal, documenting notes and findings based on the evidence, designating district-wide progress as institutionalized, developing, or emerging. Wendy Whitley, Equity and Inclusion Specialist, will provide you with details about each of these designations within the matrix. The matrix also includes space for identification and monitoring of specific and intentional next steps. The inclusion of a matrix provides accountability, ongoing identification of effective equity practices, in addition to monitoring and implementing such practices. The matrix will also allow us to be intentional, deliberate, flexible, data-driven, and inclusive of stakeholders' contributions toward equity. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once stated, "Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step towards the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. The tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. Without persistent effort, time itself becomes an ally of the insurgent and primitive forces of irrational emotionalism and social destruction. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action." The purpose of the revised MPS Equity Guidebook is to provide a roadmap for systematically, intentionally, and deliberately achieving equity, access, and inclusion practices within MPS that take into consideration the visible and sometimes invisible voices of diverse stakeholders who are concerned about, love, and seek the very best for all. Ultimately, our collective and collaborative efforts will result in a MPS Equity Guidebook that produces and demonstrates intentional and embedded actions and practices that create a cultural competence worldview that moves from words on paper to practices and beliefs that are visible in and outside of the district and are sustained and cherished for a lifetime. Put systems and procedures in place to ensure that students, educators, families, and other stakeholders have diverse opportunities to maximize success. Reflect an understanding of the unique challenges and barriers faced by individuals and/or populations of individuals. Demonstrate due diligence to ensure that needed supports are provided in an equitable manner to help students, families, educators, and community stakeholders to overcome barriers to success. Eliminate obstacles to opportunities regardless of factors such as race, gender identification, family background, special needs, language, and/or economic background. Make equitable and inclusive practices visible and viable district-wide, citywide, and nationwide in order to, in the words of one current stakeholder, be prepared for life in a global society and to walk with dignity, self-respect, and a commitment to humanity. If we engage in this work with integrity, dignity, commitment, perseverance, tenacity, diligence, respect of self and others, and engage in actions that demonstrate that this is a collaborative effort of service to the district and the community, we will reach a point of equity greatness that reflects in words and actions for all stakeholders. Dr. King revealed that everybody can be great because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and your verb agree to serve. You don't have to know about Plato and Aristotle to serve. You don't have to know Einstein's theory of relativity to serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. Such actions and belief serve as powerful tools against oppression, injustice, racism, other isms, thoughts, words, and deeds that are aimed at pulling others down instead of lifting them up. These actions and belief can also lead to excellence as we lift each other up. A few examples of recent feedback includes, due to a history of segregation in the city of Milwaukee, intentionally provide opportunities for students, educators, and families to get to know one another through engagement in various activities. They felt that this would go far to remove barriers to understanding and strengthen lifelong relationships that are genuine. Remember that one model, one story, one approach does not fit all. Seek the voices of those who are not typically sought or heard. Recognize something in students that they may not see in themselves and put systems and supports in place to nurture students to their highest potential. This is true for adults too. Create opportunities for students to learn from students. As an 8-year-old expressed, friends can learn from friends and actually end up doing better in school. And classrooms must be seen as a community and should reflect the diversity of the global community in terms of students, teachers, paraprofessionals, principals, and other staff or community partners. Equity work is fluid and ongoing. These words by Senator Robert F. Kennedy summarize what our impact could and will be. Each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lots of others, or strikes out against injustices, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. At this time, Wendy Whitley, Equity and Inclusion Specialist, will provide you with an overview of the revised MPS Equity Guidebook. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, Chair Taylor and members of the committee. My name is Wendy Whitley, and I serve as the Equity and Inclusion Specialist. As was shared, the revised draft MPS Equity Guidebook serves as a roadmap for systematically, intentionally, and deliberately achieving equity, access, and inclusion for all students, families, educators, community partners, and other stakeholders. Is designed to address 5 overarching goals: equity in academics, equity in cultural awareness and responsiveness, equity in human resources, equity in finance, and equity for students, families, educators, and community stakeholders. Each overarching goal is aligned to one of the district's priorities for success and one or more of the Administrative Policy 1.06 equity goals. This is followed by a brief statement of the current state and desired state for each goal area. Based on the desired state, we have identified 4 to 5 activities, programs, data points, and/or projects which demonstrate progress towards the desired state as of May 2020 for each goal area. A timeline and areas of focus follow this, and the timeline would begin with the 2020-2021 school year and continue through the 2023-2024 school year. Each goal has 4 specific and intentional areas of focus that are aligned to the implementation 2A through 2J of Administrative Policy 1.06, Efforts to Achieve Equity. The appendices of the guidebook will reflect an equity guidebook matrix, Administrative Policy 1.06, Equity in MPS, and Administrative Procedure 1.06, Efforts to Achieve Equity. The matrix reflects overarching 5 goals, the district's 5 priorities for success, Administrative Policy 1.06, Equity in MPS, the focus areas aligned to the Administrative Procedure 1.06, Efforts to Achieve Equity, and the timeline. The matrix also includes opportunities to provide evidence of progress toward each goal for each academic year, a section for notes and findings based on the evidence, and sections to mark if the district's focus areas are becoming institutionalized, emerging, or developing. For the purpose of the MPS Equity Guidebook Matrix, institutionalized is defined as the following. MPS has embedded and made equity, access, and inclusion practices visible and viable throughout the district and throughout the community. The district continues to assess its efforts, practices, and strategies to ensure that they are intentional, prioritized, deliberate, and sustained in the equity goal areas of academics, cultural awareness and responsiveness, human resources, finance, and students, families, educators, and community stakeholders. This designation is based on full district-wide implementation. Developing is defined as the following. MPS is ensuring the ongoing development and implementation of equity, access, and inclusion practices as strategic priorities in building meaningful and relevant district-wide and collaborative partnerships to support progress in the equity goal areas of academics, cultural awareness and responsiveness, human resources, finance, and students, families, educators, and community stakeholders. This designation is based on some district-wide implementation. And emerging is defined as the following. MPS is focused on ensuring the development and implementation of its individual and collective capacity to build, expand, enrich, enhance, and sustain its equity, access, and inclusion practices as strategic priorities in the equity goal areas of academics, cultural awareness and responsiveness, human resources, finance, and students, families, educators, and community stakeholders. This designation is based on minimal district-wide implementation. In addition, MPS will utilize multiple data sources to identify and monitor the district as having institutionalized, emerging, or developing equity practices. The following district-wide data sources will be utilized, but will not be limited to the district dashboard, school and district improvement plans, DPI state report cards, the CSI Inequity tool, ambitious instruction budget conversations, culture and climate surveys, and school-based and district-based professional development participation. Chair Taylor and members of the committee, we are happy to address any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you to both of those ladies. Also, thank you to Dr. Alice. To hear you state that it's not just a one fit for all, basically where we're starting with this equity guidebook, but to understand in order for us to fully obtain and get the results that we need, we have to make it inclusive and be equitable for all of our students and community members. So like I said before, that I'm glad that we're going to bring it as an update, but I would like to also have the other board members and listen to those of the public give us input and recommendations so that this truly can be an equity guidebook that MPS can benefit from and make sure that we have all voices in the room. Any committee members have any questions or comments for this as well?
Madam Chair, you have Director Woodward in the queue, and
Thank
then
you.
Director Miller, and then Director Baez,
Woodward, Miller, Baez.
and then
Um,
Director O'Halloran. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Woodward.
Yes, I would like to thank you for a very great presentation. It touched on everything that we need, and we've been implementing all along many of the practices that you discussed. However, the large turnover of administrative, we start and we stop. We start and we stop. We start moving and everything gets turned around every time we bring in new administration. My question is, what is it that we can do that once we put all this work into something to happen, that every time a new group of people come, it goes out the window? What can we do to put this in place, and that regardless of who come in, that this remain, because it is a very good thing that is needed, and it shouldn't be any reason to change it. But what do you think we need to do to make sure that the program like this never gets thrown out?
Administration.
Director Taylor, Director Woodward, and members of the committee, as I reflected on your question, Director Woodward, I think that this really gets into that idea of equity, access, and inclusion becoming a part of the fabric of the district. So regardless of any changes in terms of administration at the district level, at the school level, regardless of new families coming in and out of schools, regardless of community partners, this is who we are as a district. We are a district that truly values equity. It is just a part of the fabric of who we are. It's in our bones, it's in our hearts. When we speak to others, we speak to them using language that would be aligned to equity, access, and inclusion. When we go out into the community, we're using the very same type of language. And so, how we can really work very intentionally, again, to make equity, access, and inclusion the very fiber of our being, I believe, is how we begin to truly address your question, and how other organizations continue to go on for centuries in some cases, because their mission, their motto, their values is part of the fabric of everyone who walks in. When you walk in and you're on board you understand that this is a district that is about equity, access, and inclusion.
Thank you very much. Follow-up, Director Taylor. Yes, please.
Follow-up, Director Woodward.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Ellis, what is
Yes.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay, there's one other question. And we know the most well-put, thought-out plan that is there. Always, sometimes we have, problems with it and things. And what do we do in the case when there's ongoing abuse or neglect to follow the program that has been put in place? I mean, for accountability's sakes. I know you talked about accountability. It should be, but I mean, what do we do? What is a person to do when they see those type of inequities occurring in the school? What do you suggest one do to make sure there is accountability for, the program not working, not being administered as it's been directed to be?
I think in addition, Director Taylor, Director Woodward, other members of the committee, I think that in addition to what I've already stated, I also think that this speaks to engaging in the work in a courageous manner. You're always going to face some level of opposition.
Right.
You're always going to have people who are going to question motives, ideas, thoughts, etc. But I think that if we teach people to be courageous, and we take the time to really sit down and engage in deep and thoughtful dialogue with them, not surface level dialogue, but dialogue that may get a little messy at times, I think we can work through what needs to be worked through in order to address what needs to be addressed throughout the district.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, and great teacher. And thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Woodward. Next, we'll have Director Miller.
Thank you, Director Taylor. Before I raise the issues I wanted to raise about the document, if Director Taylor, if I could direct a question to you. My understanding from what you said is that you're not expecting a vote on this document tonight. You want input, and then it will come back to the committee and then to the full board. Is that my understanding?
Yep, that will be correct, Director President Miller. I wanted to ensure that we did get an update because it was due last month, but given COVID-19, they did not have a chance to present it. As well, they are still looking to work with community members and to have the voice of students. And so I feel in order for us to effectively have an equity guidebook, we need to ensure that we have those other individuals or partners involved in it. It also gives a chance for other board members to bring forth recommendations or to have other questions answered as well.
Thank you. I totally support that. I appreciate that. So I wanted to raise issues. But first of all, Dr. Ellis, Ms. Whitley, thank you so much for the work that's gone on it for this document. I looked at the previous document. I looked at this document. Lots of strengths and weaknesses, and I think we're heading in the right direction. So first, I'd just like to say that I think when Ms. Whitley talked about the matrix, I think a number of the things that I'm going to say first might be addressed in the matrix. And I will turn all of these into you. I have them typed out, so you don't have to take notes. I'll get them all to you, Dr. Ellis and Ms. Whitley. I think the guide should give more steps that make it clear to staff the practices they can and should be implementing. But I hear that's the role of the matrix, if I'm understanding that. 2, I think that we have to clearly integrate bilingualism, multiculturalism, and ethnic studies into the guidebook. So it's seen that those areas are clearly part of our equity formula. 3, be specific with goals in our timeline. 4, explain better how best practices will be accumulated and shared. It talks about a repository of district-wide equity best practices, but I don't really know what that quite means. And then 5, present an appendix of vocabulary, definitions, explanations, acronyms, education terms, so that we are all speaking the same language. Those are just some suggestions. So I'm going to go through and just explain a few things, Director Taylor, if that's okay, about 4 of the areas. Under goal 1 at the very end, I suggest that in the appendix that it is spelled out what are the stages of professional development for equity trainings and integration of equity into other professional development trainings. So it's very clear to how we're actually training our staff on that issue. That's goal 1. Under goal 2, I think this is a chance for us to align, to give more explanation of the alignment of systems necessary for all student academic behavior and social success. Things like, that show the multi-tiered system reports, cultural responsiveness, social emotional learning, restorative practices, mindfulness, PBIS, mediation, behavioral interventions, and other pertinent practices and approaches. I think we need to be able to look at those in a more aligned way. And that falls under goal 2, under cultural awareness and responsiveness. Under goal 3, and we're talking about recruitment, recruiting and retaining. I think one thing that's very important for us to look at and be clear about is the important role that MPSU takes in the process of attracting and retaining teachers of color within this timeline. I think it's exceptional what we're doing with MPSU, and I think the last I heard, we had 400 enrollees, and 90% of them were teachers of color. So I think that should be addressed so that we're aware of that role. And then under goal 5, I'm going to make a suggestion to the board and administration that at the school level, we do something a little bit different. We've done it in different ways. Put it this, let me say this. I think we should direct school engagement councils at each school to do an annual equity audit assessment. And the administration should create a tool using this guidebook to bring together school communities to report to an annual district-wide equity conference. That way, all the schools are coming and talking about equity at the school level. But in addition to that, I'm going to be proposing that in the high schools, that we create equity teams made up of 50% students to carry out this equity assessment. Also, I think we should hold a student equity conference in the fall to train students on the equity teams and in equity policy, and in the spring hold a follow-up high school student conference to report on implementation in their schools of these policies. The superintendent actually did this last year. At the beginning of the school year, we had a district-wide conference of students, and it was phenomenal. There was all sorts of training in restorative practices, mindfulness, all sorts of things talking about equity. And then the superintendent brought them back at the end of the year to actually report on that. And I think that the process that these groups of students did met district-wide, but also met in their individual schools, had a profound effect on those students. So I think we need to actually make this a policy. So those are my suggestions, and I will be putting those forward for the board to look at.
Thank you, Director Miller. I think next we have Director Baez. Wait, did administration have any comments on Director Miller's questions or comments before I move on to Director Baez?
We're good.
All right, thank you. Director Baez?
Okay, I'm on.
Yes, you are.
Yes, thank you. Chair Taylor, thank you very much for this opportunity. I want to take an additional take on this beyond what has been discussed up to now. I think that in reading through the correspondence of some of the people that have reacted to this document that has been presented to them, there's a lot of interesting stuff in them. There's a lot of anger reflected in how they reacted to the document. And there's a lot of uncertainty, not clear on what this document does. I do not think that we have, with all due respect, an equity guidebook. What we have is what you have suggested a number of times, the administration. I'm speaking about Dr. Ellis and Ms. Whitley. You have suggested that what we have is really a roadmap to an equity document. And if we would have called this a roadmap to an equity document, we would have, I think, gotten a lot more collaboration and support by people who would see this as sort of like setting the tone for what we want to do. I'm very careful about how we message issues. The message that we're sending by creating this document is a little bit confusing because of the document itself. There is good stuff in it. Don't get me wrong. Okay, there are good things in there. But when I heard Dr. Ellis at the beginning, I wish that would have been in the document. That's not in the document. Okay. When I heard some of the issues that you raised about a matrix, that is not in the document. Okay. So what happens is that people are reacting to something that I think is really a roadmap to a document, but not the equity guidebook that we ought to put out to the public. An equity guidebook has to be very concrete, has to be very specific. I would dare suggest a number of things for that document, and like Director Miller, I will be happy to then put all of that together and send it to you, so that you have my input in this. But I do not want to dismiss the people that have raised concerns about this document, because frankly, they saw that what you were proposing was an equity book, an equity handbook. That's not what we have. What we have is really this roadmap. Okay, so I saw the 5 goals, and they are fine. I think that maybe through the process of inclusion and what have you and discussion, we may add another goal or 2, but I think that those 5 goals are pretty good. Okay. But let me suggest something. It seems to me that we need a guidebook that affirms, first of all, that we're about justice, that we're about equity, that we are really about changing and transforming what we're doing in our schools, very much like Dr. Ellis stated at the beginning. Okay. That is like a first part, an affirmation of our policies, an affirmation of our vision of what we want to do. I think that we need a second section of the equity document that lays out those goals that you talk about within the context of a matrix, if you may, or within each one of the goals, a matrix that goes specifically to how things are at right now, the current conditions, where we want to go, what's desirable, and who is going to be responsible, by what time are we going to do it, by how are we going to report back, and how are we going to evaluate if that has been done or not. It seems to me that then we need a third section of the document that is a set of appendices that includes all those policies that the board has passed, that includes whatever references we make in that section, that second section I'm talking about in terms of the goals, etc., whatever programs we talk about. So if we address the issue of ambitious instruction, we sort of like understand what that means, but the public that gets that document is going to get, something that has to be clear in language, that has to be very specific in terms of what that means. And the appendices need to become sort of like a part of an essential part of this equity book that addresses those particular program issues, and that in addition to that, it becomes instructional, it becomes educating. Appendices need to be educating pieces. They cannot just be thrown in there to add to a book. And each one of those appendices, very carefully organized, need to point to the kinds of things that we have done and which we're going to do, and then the programs and the activities and the events that we have going, and describe them in a language that is understood by people. The document presented right now is full of edu-speak. There is a lot of stuff there that I didn't understand as a board member, okay? That I didn't know what people were talking about, okay? So I think we need to break with that, because the message that we want to get to people is clear, okay? And then finally, I think a fourth section of this equity book needs to be, like Director Miller indicated, a sort of like a glossary of terms, of concepts. Has to be clear, because the reader is not necessarily you or board members, etc. No, they're parents, they're students, they're people that need to understand what we mean by ambitious instruction. They're people that need to know what we mean when we refer to a particular department or a particular effort or a particular event. So I think that a glossary would help immensely in a document like that. So I don't want to presume anything here. The communications that we received, some of them were a little bit all over the place, and some of them were very specific because they reflected a certain anger at us not having done enough and not explaining well what we have done. It seems to me that we have, but we may have not explained it to the point that everybody understands that. So I'm going to suggest that I will be happy to take my comments, put them together, and send them to you. And I am not intending in any way that these have to be followed, but I would happily suggest that you have a bunch of resources here among board members, and you have a bunch of people that are also resourceful in this issue of equity in your constituency and in the stakeholders that were involved in the earlier documents that some claim that they were not involved now. I would be a part of the folks that would suggest to you, please take this into consideration. And this organization of the document is critical. But right now, I do not think you have an equity book. You have a roadmap to an equity guidebook. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Baez. Administration, do you have any feedback or comments on Dr. Baez's comment? Director Woodward, I do see you. You are in the queue after Director O'Halloran.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
we actually have Director O'Halloran, Director Peterson, and then Director Woodward.
Thank you. Administration, did you have any feedback for Dr. Baez's comments? Or?
Chair Taylor, members of the committee, I would say that we have taken careful note of what has been said, but as we stated earlier from Director Taylor's guidance right out of the gate, this is an update, and we will have an opportunity to go back together to come back with a full piece. The piece that we were talking about with the matrix is we have already started to design that, but we need input from others as well. And with the pandemic and full effect, we have yet to gather and garner all of that and to be able to bring back. So this is an update, and we accept the information that's been shared with us. We're making note of that, and we will be more than happy to return in June with a final product. By no intent tonight did we say that this was a final product.
Thank you.
Thank you, administration. Director Baez, any follow-up?
Follow-up, I would just say that I completely understand that. I was not intending in any way to say that you don't have activities and work related to equity that are significant and important. I think that the issue here tonight is that you provided a report on something called the Equity Guidebook. My point is that you don't have an equity guidebook. You have a roadmap to an equity guidebook, and that people should know that that's where you're going with this.
All right. Thank you, Director Baez. Director O'Halloran.
Thank you, Chair Taylor, and thank you to everybody who's been working on this road to a guidebook or a guidebook, whatever you want to consider it. For the appendices, I know the intent is to come back in June and have them presented then. Is there a way that we would be able to get them earlier or get into the public's hands earlier than noticing it and then having the meeting 3 days later, so that people can consider that and it can be circulated for input if the intent is to have us vote on it at the end of June and have it approved? that's more of a process question. I don't know if Dr. Mann or administration would be able to respond to that.
I will ask administration first. That's okay.
Oh, Chair Taylor, members of the committee, we will do our 100% to make sure that is able to happen. I will just say that with meetings and making sure that all of the interest groups that we need to get in, as for students, a number of individuals, we will do everything we possibly can to make it available as early and as expedient as we possibly can. But it's a process in work.
And I appreciate
Director
that. I appreciate that we're working under difficult circumstances. So thank you for that. How, so as far as the community groups, I did send an email with some of the people who I reach out to when I want input or feedback on equity concerns. Do we have a plan in place to reach out to actively seek that input before it comes back in June? Or are we just anticipating people will see it and then react and provide that response to us?
Chair Taylor, Director O'Halloran, members of the committee, I do have that information, and we will actively seek out those particular groups in addition to other groups.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Director O'Halloran.
Okay. So, one of the people who sent in testimony tonight pointed out that we do have a number of resolutions that the board has passed that would speak on equity issues. If we're going to revise appendices or incorporate other materials, redesign it the way that Director Baez suggested, is it possible to incorporate some of those as reference points, speaking of the bilingual resolution or the anti-racist resolutions, so that it's a statement of our board's values and how we want to see the district move forward.
Administration.
Chair Taylor, members of the committee, we have taken note of that, and we will address those concerns as well.
Okay.
Thanks.
Just two more questions. I'll make it really quick. For the in the matrices, you said that we would have all of these kind of quantitative measures, data sources, and various data points. Will we incorporate a qualitative process to incorporate feedback from families and staff and community groups to say, yes, we have institutionalized this, or it is in development, or it is emerging, a process so that we're not, sometimes data can tell a story, but having somebody tell the story is different, if that makes sense. Just wondering how community voice will be incorporated in the measuring of our success.
Also, Director O'Halloran, do you want to give them your last question too, and maybe they can answer them both?
Yeah, and I put this in the email, and I think community groups. So if you just want to speak to, in general, how the original work was incorporated in this, that was a large concern that I heard. So with that, I will pass.
Thank you. Administration.
Chair Taylor, Director O'Halloran, and members of the committee, yes. The matrix will have space available for both quantitative and qualitative data from diverse stakeholders. And then in terms of how information from the original document was also incorporated into the revised document, I think what may be helpful, because I did mention some of those things, but what may be helpful is if I complete a chart and kind of show you by comparing and contrasting what was modified, what is still in place, et cetera.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Peterson.
Thank you. Just a few comments. I appreciate the work that's been done, the questions that have been asked, the suggestions that have been made. I have a few suggestions. One is that we make sure to, in a preface or somewhere in the document, situate our equity plan, our policy, whatever, our struggle within the context of acknowledgement that we are operating in a district, in a metropolitan area, which is the most segregated metropolitan place in this nation.
Right.
And that is something that we need to both situate ourselves in and respond to. And I think part of building for equity is to help empower parents and students and staff to speak about those issues and to become more comfortable discussing those issues, which will take some work, especially for some of us white folk who haven't had a lifetime of having those discussions. And to see, basically have as a vision that we're trying to create what I'd call greenhouses of democracy and justice, that our schools should be that, both in terms of how they're organized and operate in terms of policy, but also in terms of the type of values and disposition and curriculum that we should share with our students. So our schools become centers of renaissance, resistance, and justice in our beleaguered neighborhoods. And one way I think that could be done is as we do two things. One, in Director Woodward's point of recognizing that in the past we've had some good initiatives, but they seem to fall and collapse when a new program or a new administrator comes in, especially a new superintendent. And we might want to acknowledge that and just describe a few of the past very positive programs. Some of those are the resolutions that have been mentioned. And finally, Director Miller's idea of school-based committees with maybe 50% students. I think that would be good. I think what would be most interesting is to ask each of the schools to come up with their own analysis and implementation plan for equity in their schools. Because I think if it's just top down, people don't have as much buy-in to it. I think there needs to be discussions at the school level. I know that when we started La Scuola Fraternity and there was some differences amongst parents and teachers about issues of race and culture, we developed an anti-racist and multicultural policy through a process that really brought people together and laid things out. And different schools have different concerns, language concerns, ethnic concerns, class issues. And I think that we should expect the best out of all our staff. So those are some ideas. Thank you very much.
Administration, any follow-up to that, comments, feedback?
Chair Taylor, members of the committee, thank you for the information, Director Peterson, and we have taken note of that, and we'll be making adjustments.
Thank you for that. Any follow-up, Director Peterson?
No.
Thank you. Director Woodward?
Yes. Again, I would like to say that the presentation was great, and I know it's not completed. However, the things that we are now living with in the global society has been in place. I've heard from a principal back from the earlier years in the life of this district who has talked about the type of things that when this system became predominantly African American, most of the programs were taken out. And now we're trying to build up. We're not going to be able to satisfy everyone. The administration and the community at large and professionals have the obligation to try to put together something that's going to work for all people, not just a specific few. I agree we can listen to our youth, but scholars, but they're not an authority on what they need. They have to grow and develop to understand some of the things and why things are necessary to be implemented to make life better for them. And we can't just buy into everything. Everybody come along and say, I want this, I want that, this should be. Everybody's got a different idea. And if things had worked, we wouldn't have to train people to show equity lens. They would already know how to treat each other, love each other, care for each other, and do the things that are necessary. I don't really see where we should have to even train a person. And it is nationwide knowledge. Milwaukee is the most segregated, racist place in this nation. Finally, Michigan went under us. Michigan, now us. And it's nationwide knowledge. We have to make a change, and people have to stand up and speak truth. And you can't satisfy people, because if people had all so much going for them, they should be, we wouldn't have to even go through this. We would be just living with love, care for each other. And there wouldn't be any need for an equity policy, period. All you got to do is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Live, love, and take and know that if you don't want something to happen to you, you shouldn't have to teach adults and then go into children who have not even developed and grown up. It's good to listen to our children, but we are the ones to make decisions for them to grow up. I never heard of more children are teaching their parents and telling them what to do. And that's why we have so many problems in this society today, because we are allowing the children to tell us what they are going to do. It was a day that parents, adults, reared the children and taught them the proper way to live, not children telling us how to live. So I just look forward and would like to hope that we can not only listen to what they have to say, but we explain to them the importance of it. They don't even know their history to make a decision. They haven't been taught it. So we have to make the decision. But there are other groups and larger groups. My desire is to see an appeal to a larger group, not the people that has to implement it, because there are going to be biases. So we need to be looking at outside where there are many churches, community groups who are responsible and at the top of all of us, and who are the people who are over us. These people, tax dollars, which go into this program. We need to look to them to come out and talk, not just somebody complaining, because we haven't had an opportunity to appeal to this, the wide community. So I think there needs to be more input from a wider community than just an MPS. And I just hope that this is the road that we would take, looking for input from people with experience and expertise and knowledge. And it takes training to know these things, not just what we think should be. So I just pray that this will be one of the things that will happen. And again, I want to thank you, the both, and administration for their efforts and to move forward, considering back from the beginning of segregation, when most of white flight and left this community, but people come into the community don't know the community and has to be taught how to live within a community of color. So I just want to say that, and I must say it because I feel it in my heart, that it's time for not allowing people to, everybody in the district decide, I want this, that. You can't satisfy everybody. You never will. So you need people, what is best for the district and our children. And if there's any comment from Ms. Ellis or Ms. Whitney, I'm open to hear it.
Thank you for that, Director Woodward. Administration, any comments, feedback on Director Woodward's comment?
Go ahead.
Chair Taylor, Director Woodward, and committee, just thank you for your comments. Those are greatly appreciated. Thank you.
And I thank you for all your work.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, is there any public comment on this item?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, we do have 8 individuals who have submitted written testimony to the Office of Board Governance. And I will go through each of the pieces of written testimony, displaying the constituent's name and a summary of the written communication. We have number 1, the first comment is from Jane Audette, and it is informational. And Jane Audette is offering suggestions and comments relative to development of the guidebook. Kevin O'Brien supports the item and encourages the board to implement completely. Anna DeVarg is also submitting testimony asking for more information and has questions about different components of the guidebook. Jamil Harris does not support the guidebook as submitted. Hope Owens Wilson does not support the guidebook as submitted. Angela Harris does not support the guidebook as submitted. Larry Hoffman has submitted questions and is submitting his testimony as informational, asking specific questions about different components in the guidebook. And then we have Nicole Jansen, who also does not support the guidebook. And that makes up the public testimony.
Okay, Madam Chair, just have a question in reference to the public testimony. For those that did turn in something where they had either questions or wanted something to be read into the record, is there a reply that goes back out to them to initiate or confirm that it happened? Just because we're on an errand for everybody to be clear, there have been a couple of hiccups in reference to public testimony. So I want to make sure we kind of clear the air tonight.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, immediately upon receipt of the public testimony, members of the constituencies do receive acknowledgement of receipt. And actually, by reading into the record, whether or not an individual supports is seeking information or does not support the item, that becomes a part of the official record. So after the meeting, typically, when individuals show up in person, we would send out a postcard to them acknowledging their presence in the meeting, and that is the same process we will use for public testimony.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I also would like to thank you, ladies, for the work that you have put in tonight. There's a lot I have to say, but I will definitely wait. I have recommendations as well too, and I am looking forward to seeing what we can consider a finished item for Equity Guidebook. I was looking for the words to compare of what this document was, and I think Dr. Baez hit it on the head for me. And it was basically a roadmap that would help us assist in getting to an Equity Guidebook. Like I said once before, that will be greatly appreciated and effective in MPS. Any other board members or admin, do you have any more comments on this agenda item? As I stated once before, this was more for an update, and it will come back next month to be moving forward.
Madam Chair, it looks like you do have Director Woodward in the queue to speak.
All right, thank you, Madam Secretary. Director Woodward.
Yes, I just want to ask one question. Can groups from the community, would they like the, I can say, submit a wider community from the community information for them to contact maybe and get some information from other groups? Would they be receptive for other groups that they may not already have to participate? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
And just to make sure, yes, Director Woodward, can you hear me?
Yes, okay.
Thank you. Just to be clear, are you, will there be a wider scope of community groups that will be able to either give recommendations or have a comment or input in reference of the equity guidebook to administration? Is that your question or comment? I want to make sure that I am hearing you clearly and correctly.
Working on this equity program, I wanted to know if they would be receptive for other groups that can have input as well, if they don't already have them. That's my question.
Thank you, Director Woodward. Administration.
Chair Taylor, Director Woodward, members of the committee, we would love to broaden the net and include additional community members. So thank you for that recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Any follow-ups to that, Director Woodward?
No, that's all I want to know, because I want to make contact, and I some kind of way got to get how to get in touch with her. That's all.
Thank you, Director Woodward. Yeah, and thank you for everyone that had a comment on tonight and for the public. And as you have heard tonight, if you would like any input or suggestions or recommendations, make sure that you send those in. We truly thank you for taking the time out to ensure that we are getting this document correct. We absolutely know nothing will be 100% perfect, but I think together we can ensure that it does touch base over all sets of people in community. I think my mic muted. Madam Coordinator, is there any other agenda item?
Madam Chair, that was the last agenda item on this meeting's agenda.
All right. Thank everybody for tuning in. I hope everyone is being safe, and thank you for being a great part of our students and family lives.
Madam Chair, before you adjourn, as a reminder to the listening audience, a meeting of the Committee on Legislation, Rules, and Policies will be held shortly after adjournment of this meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.